Welcome to part 5 of my 9-day bike trip series, where I'm exploring central and eastern Ontario from the seat of my bicycle. In this episode I'll be riding from Charleston Lake Provincial Park to Sharbot Lake Provincial Park. Geographically, the area I'll be riding through is part of the Canadian Shield, which consists of lots of igneous rock. Since the landscape includes so many obstacles, all the roads are pretty windy, which should make for a really interesting ride. So today is Wednesday, May 22nd, 2019, and this morning I was awoken by the sound of many birds chirping. Last night the temperature went below 6 degrees Celsius, and even with 3 layers of clothing I still found it quite cold inside my summer sleeping bag. I woke up at around 6:45 and was glad to see that the raccoons from last night hadn't found a way to get into my food supply, so I still got to enjoy my overnight oats breakfast. By around 8:15 I had everything packed up and made my way out of my campsite. It still feels quite cold this morning, so I started out with my jacket and pants, but I'm delighted to see that the forecast predicts a high of 19 degrees Celsius and a 0% chance of precipitation. There's also virtually no wind this morning, so the weather really couldn't be more perfect for a long day of riding. I made my way out of the park and stopped for a quick photo op in front of the Charleston Lake sign. This is something I normally do when I first arrive at a park, but yesterday I didn't take the time to stop because I was attempting to get at the park's gatehouse before it closed. Shortly after getting onto the main road, I passed a small lake called Killenbeck Lake. As I'm riding, I'm noticing a lot of rock faces on either side of the road, which is a strong characteristic of the Canadian Shield. The Canadian Shield covers more than half of Canada and consists of 4-billion-year-old volcanic rock covered by a thin layer of soil. The Canadian Shield once had jagged peaks higher than any of today's mountains, but millions of years of erosion have transformed these mountains into rolling hills. Yesterday I didn't have too much luck when I tried my new portable AM/FM radio, but this morning I decided to give it another try. Up ahead I'm approaching a community called Lyndhurst, which is just off to the right, but my route will take me to the left, so I won't be passing directly through it. So as I described, I've been expecting to see lots of rocky terrain today, but what I didn't anticipate were these little pockets of farmland scattered throughout the region. Since leaving Gananoque yesterday, I've been riding within the township of Leeds in the Thousand Islands, but I'm now entering the township of Rideau Lakes. After passing through a small community called Morton, I rode a short section of Highway 15 and crossed over the Morton Creek. At the top of the next hill I turned off the highway onto the much quieter Jones Falls Road. Jones Falls is home of 4 locks in the Rideau Canal waterway and also the site of a stone arch dam built in the early 1800s. These points of interest would have been great to see, but regrettably I missed the turnoff without realizing it until it was already too late. But I did take a detour over to this bridge to at least get a quick look down at the Rideau Canal. Even though I didn't get to see it in person, if you're passing through this area I definitely recommend stopping by Jones Falls. The time is now about 10 a.m. and I've traveled about 27 kilometers so far this morning. The terrain today has kind of been like a roller coaster. There have been quite a few steep hill climbs, followed by a similar amount of steep descents. At the bottom of this hill I entered the community of Elgin. Elgin has restaurants and a grocery store, but it's still too early to stop for lunch and I don't need any groceries right now. I did, however, take a quick break here and made a quick phone call to the campground where I'm planning on staying tonight. From my phone call I found out that Sharbot Lake's gatehouse will be closing at 4 p.m. this afternoon, so if I want to avoid paying an $11 booking fee, I'll need to arrive before then. Heading out of Elgin I rode along Highway 15. In areas that are dominated by the Canadian Shield, you often don't have too many choices of roads to ride on. When I reached the small community of Crosby, I got to turn onto a slightly quieter roadway, which took me into the community of Newboro. Since I missed seeing the locks at Jones Falls, I decided to get off the main road in Newboro so I could at least see one of the locks in the Rideau Canal. This lock transitions boats 2.4 meters between the level of Newboro Lake and the level of Upper Rideau Lake. This lock also represents what's called the home port of the Rideau Canal, since the waterway flows downstream on either side of the lock towards their respective final destinations. This unusual looking building is a Newboro blockhouse built in 1833 to protect the Rideau Canal. While I was stopped I spoke with the lockmaster and he told me that the boat traffic is quite low in the middle of the week at this time of year and he's only seen 1 boat so far this morning. For some context, the Rideau Canal waterway is about 200 kilometers in length and connects the city of Kingston with Canada's capital city, Ottawa. First opening in 1832, it's the oldest continuously operating canal system in North America. The community I can see in the distance is the village of Westport, which is located on Upper Rideau Lake. The time is now about 11:45, and I've traveled 56 kilometers so far this morning. Westport will be the last major community I'll be passing through for the next 35 kilometers, and it's where I'm planning on stopping for lunch. Westport was first settled between 1810 and 1820. Since it was incorporated as a village in 1904, it's maintained its independence as a municipality and has never been amalgamated with the surrounding township. With a current population of 590 and a total size of 1.68 square kilometers, it's Ontario's smallest municipality. It seems like a really nice little village with lots of beautiful historic buildings. After browsing the lunch options in Westport, I decided on a place called Steve's Rito Restaurant. Having traveled for 4.5 days to get here, with another 4.5 days left to go, this meal marks the unofficial halfway point of my trip. I ordered from the lunch special menu their quarter chicken meal, which came with a salad and also iced tea to drink. The meal was delicious, and it feels great to be halfway done the trip. After leaving Westport, I had a really steep hill to climb, which Strava classifies as a Category 4 climb. Climbing steep hills when you're carrying 50 pounds of cargo and riding a recumbent bike is certainly a lot of work. From the clips in my videos, you might get the sense that I seem to go down a lot more hills than I climb, but the reality is it's a lot easier to hold the camera stable when I'm coasting rather than climbing, so I film a lot more when I'm going down the hills. At the bottom of that last hill I entered Lanark County and also the township of Tay Valley. Lanark County bills itself as the maple syrup capital of Ontario. This lake here on the right is called Farron Lake. I'm now approaching a community called Bolingbrook, where I'll turn off this road and onto a really quiet one. You wouldn't know it now, but Bolingbrook once included 4 mills, 2 churches, a cheese factory, a school, a store, and a lumbering trade that employed hundreds. Here I'm crossing over the Tay River, which provided the water power that once fueled Bolingbrook's livelihood. After a few short kilometers passing through a corner of Lanark County, I've now entered Frontenac County and the township of Central Frontenac. Prior to this trip, I installed a new set of cranks on my bike, which have a smaller set of chain rings. On previous bike tours, I found that my knees would start to act up on days when I had a lot of hill climbing to do. With my new cranks, I'm able to gear down more than 20% lower for hill climbing, which my knees seem to approve of. When you're doing a multi-day tour, it's really not a race as far as I'm concerned. The main goal is to make sure you can sustain your body for the duration of the trip, so you can arrive at the finish line in one piece. With that being said, today is still somewhat of a race, since I'm hoping to arrive at the gatehouse of my campground before it closes at 4 p.m. The time is now 1:45, and I've traveled 78 kilometers with another 20 left to go, so I should be able to make it barring any unforeseen circumstances. So the road I've been riding on is called Crow Lake Road, which not surprisingly leads to Crow Lake. Just past Crow Lake I had some CP rail tracks to cross. Today I've been feeling virtually no wind, which has been a welcome change from yesterday. Eventually Crow Lake Road terminates at County Road 38, where I turned and headed north. This lake on my left is called St. George Lake. The traffic on this road seems relatively light today, but I imagine it varies a lot. There are a lot of cottages in this area, so I bet on a Friday afternoon in the summer, this road is packed with people heading to their cottages. So here's my very first look at Sharbot Lake. The road I'm riding on crosses right through the middle of the lake, dividing it approximately in half. In between the two halves, there's also a community called Sharbot Lake. I made a quick stop at the local grocery store to pick up some food that I can eat at my campsite tonight. Today I've been noticing a minor issue with my bike's handlebars being a bit loose, and sadly the bike uses a non-metric set screw, which I'm not carrying the appropriate size of Allen key to properly tighten. So back there I also made a quick stop at Home Hardware, and they had what I needed. As the sign on the right shows, within close proximity of Sharbot Lake Provincial Park, there's also another provincial park called Silver Lake. To get to either of them you need to ride on Highway 7, which is where I am now. This portion of Highway 7 is part of the Trans-Canada Highway, so it has a lot of traffic on it, and I really wasn't looking forward to riding on it. Thankfully there's only a few short kilometers left to ride, and at least there's a narrow paved shoulder which makes it somewhat safer. So here I've arrived at Sharbot Lake Provincial Park, which is literally right beside the highway. Having arrived at 3:30, I was able to go inside the gatehouse and save myself $11 by purchasing a camping permit on the spot. I chose a campsite in the Ridgeview area of the park, which is the furthest to get to. Since the park is situated directly beside such a major highway, I was hoping to get as far away from the traffic noise as I could. This small lake on the left is called Black Lake. The park certainly has some very steep roads. So here I've arrived at my campsite. After I got off my bike, the first thing I noticed was the massive amount of mosquitoes and black flies that surrounded me. To escape them, I decided to take a short walk down to check out Sharbot Lake. On a weekday afternoon in May, it certainly seems pretty quiet. The park doesn't seem to have any kind of beach on this lake. This area is really just intended to be used as a boat launch. However, to mark the official ending point of my day of riding, I felt a quick dip in the lake would be suitable. The water felt colder than any of the other places I've swam this week, but getting out to dry off felt very nice and warm. From here in the distance I can see the Sharbot Lake community that I passed through earlier. In the early stages of planning my trip, I had thought I might be able to rent a canoe from the park and paddle there for dinner, but of course the park office closes so early. Instead, my dinner back at the campsite consisted of a salmon salad sandwich, a yogurt parfait, and something called a whoopie pie, which looked interesting. It's basically 2 thin layers of chocolate cake with a thick layer of peanut butter in between. Quite delicious. After my meal, I went and had a shower. The park only has 1 showering facility, and it's quite a long walk from my campsite. I could have selected one of these closer campsites, but I fear the sound from Highway 7 on the other side of that fence would really detract from the camping experience. The entire park seems to be nearly empty tonight. I've only noticed 1 other campsite occupied. There's virtually no wind right now, and I've been finding the bugs here absolutely unbearable when standing still, so I was glad to be able to escape them inside my tent. After dark, I heard a few raindrops falling, but they didn't amount to very much, and I drifted off to sleep in my tent. So today I rode my bike a total of 102 kilometers. According to Strava, this ride included a total of 808 meters of elevation gains, which is an all-time high for me on a day of a recumbent tour. Stay tuned for the next episode in this series, where tomorrow I'll be riding from here at Sharbot Lake Provincial Park down to the town of Napanee. Sadly, the weather forecast for tomorrow predicts a 90% chance of showers in the afternoon, so I'm going to do my best to ride as far as I can in the morning before the rain starts. I hope you enjoyed joining me in part 5 of this series. If you watched all the way to the end of this episode, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.